Hello again, Autism Nation. Welcome once again to the Adult Autism, a Spectrum of Uniqueness podcast. Today, I'm happy to be joined by Diane Gould, who's a licensed clinical social worker. And Diane, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having
Well,
me.
our topic today is a real interesting one on pathological demand avoidance. And I know that you're an expert in this area and you're gracious to join me today and to talk a little bit about this. I'm really not, really don't know much about this at all. So I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say about it. But maybe before we even start down that path, maybe you could just share with us a little bit about who you are, how you got involved in this field, and where you're at now.
Sure. This is the hardest part, I think, talking about myself. But so I've always wanted to be a social worker, read a book about Jane Addams, I think in fourth grade, and decided I was going to be a social worker when I grew up. And
Okay.
then got involved volunteering with peers with disabilities when I was probably 15, and then just
Hmm.
carried that through my profession. Wound up focusing on serving autistic individuals. I've worked in big agencies and small agencies, and for special ed co-ops is what we have in Illinois. So, and like special education programs in public schools.
Sure.
And now I just have a private practice that focuses on serving autistic people. And probably like the other thing I probably should mention is that I was diagnosed as autistic at age 65.
Wow, late
Yeah,
diagnosed.
yeah, just in April, right before my book, Navigating PDA in America, came out in June. I probably would have changed some things maybe if I had been my joke is I just thought I was like a really good therapist, that I understood my clients. Turns out I had an advantage, but
Yes, exactly. Well, that's great. Well, thanks. So you have a diverse background. You've done a lot of different things over the
yeah,
years,
I think
and to
so.
where you've gotten now. And so I'm really curious about this whole notion of pathological
Yeah.
demand avoidance. First of all, what is it? And then how did you get involved with all of
Yeah,
this?
let me start with the second part. I think
Okay.
everything in the world of special needs, disabilities, all started from a mom who wouldn't take no for an answer. And I had been working with a family who had an autistic young adult child. And she said, you got to pay attention to PDA. And I was like, there's always new stuff popping
Right.
up and all.
Yep.
She stopped listening to it. So she kept sending me articles and book names. And I said, all right, I'll pay attention. And what was really interesting to me is I had been doing some assessments on kids with really horrific trauma histories that were in Chicago public schools. And the recommendations I was writing to serve these kids were all these PDA strategies. So when
Ah,
I saw the articles in the books, I was like, oh, this is what I recommend. They're just like said better than how I'm saying it. So
okay.
it's like a blend of my interest in autism and my interest in trauma. So I said to this parent, all right, let me learn more. And I started getting training from somebody in the UK. And that was in 2019. And then I thought, all right, I'm going to have a workshop on PDA in America and bring some speakers in from the UK.
Hmm.
Scheduled it, happened to be March 2020, which was
Ah,
a strange time of year, but our time in the world.
yeah.
And but we had 165 people come, and it was right
Wow.
before the world shut down. We got our speakers back on the last flights to the UK. And
Wow.
yeah, it was wild, but it gave me a chance to get a website up and running. So when families, especially, would say, hey, there's this thing, PDA, they'd have a website to show people to say, look, it's a real thing. It has a
Yeah.
website.
Hmm.
Uh, so things just worked out the way they were supposed to. And for the people that
Yeah.
it was It was an unreal experience. And now we've had a conference every March since then to bring people together to
Oh,
PDA.
oh, that's wonderful. And just to ask you just briefly about that, is the conference just for professionals or is it for lay people
Everybody.
or
Yeah. Professionals, family members, PDAers themselves, therapists,
okay.
teachers, anyone, and it's hybrid. And it's
Wow.
yeah. So
Okay. That's
yes,
awesome. So
it's
what is
really exciting.
this?
All right, so what is this? So let me tell you
Yeah.
history, because the history I think explains it. So in the 80s, a prominent psychologist in London was diagnosing kids with autism, and she
Okay.
noticed this subgroup that were different than the majority of autistic kids she was seeing, but they were very much like each other. And one of the things that stood out for her was that they avoided everyday demands. And then she termed this group pathological demand avoidance. And she chose pathological on purpose because she wanted people to realize they couldn't help it. They weren't being defiant or disobedient. These kids just couldn't help avoiding demands.
Okay.
Now I kind of wish maybe she hadn't used the word pathological,
Yeah.
and a lot of PDAers themselves call PDA pervasive drive for autonomy
I see.
instead of pathological demand avoidance
Got it.
too. So
Yeah.
it's autistic profile. There's some people who don't think you have to be autistic to be PDA. The majority of people do. So like in my head, it's still a subgroup, a profile for autistic people.
Yeah, and when I've kind of read a little bit about it, and I've read about that, and I thought to myself, well, man, I'm kind of like that. But I think the difference might be where it could be for some people just a personality trait. Like for me, it's probably just a trait. Maybe
Right.
for other people, it goes to more of an extreme, or if it's more a domineering part of who they are and how they respond to things or situations or whatever. How does this start? How does this all develop anyway?
I just like autism, it because PDAers share the same differences as other autistic individuals. So it's about having a different kind of nervous system.
Okay.
All autistic people have a different nervous system than a neurotypical or
Yeah.
non-autistic person. And that means they process information differently, and experience the world differently. And PDAers specifically have such a sensitive nervous system
Okay.
that it can easily go into fight, flight, or freeze. And one of the things that does kind of make a difference with this population is that sometimes PDAers have a hard time doing things they want to do.
Mm,
So it's not that they're just avoiding things that everybody doesn't want to do,
okay.
cleaning,
Yeah.
things that they want to do. They
Oh.
sometimes can't. You could have a PDA child who is so excited to go to a party, a birthday party for a classmate or something, and then get to the door to go and not be able to.
Mm-hmm.
And many PDA kids, since we're talking about it, across the world where there's some research done, 70% of PDA children cannot attend school regularly. And most want to go to school. It just
Mm-hmm.
causes so much emotional distress that they
Yeah.
can't. And that's one of the reasons we really want people to understand PDA so we can prevent that. So we can make schools work for these kids who want to go to school and
Mm-hmm.
not have that distress on the whole family. So we became a nonprofit, PDA North America, a few years ago, really trying to broaden our impact and awareness to
Mm-hmm.
schools, families, and
There,
PDAs.
there, well, there's a lot to learn about this, and one of the things I'm kind of picking up on. I mean, just if you hear the word avoidance, to me,
Mm-hmm.
when I hear that term, I think, um, is it anxiety? Is anxiety a component of this? I
Yes,
guess that's my question for you.
right. A very high component, a very serious component,
Hmm.
that PDAers are highly anxious, and that results often in a need to
Okay.
control people, control the environment, because control
Hmm.
is what makes anxiety decrease. But
Right.
yes, anxiety is a high part of this. So
So
that's the
how would that manifest itself in a let's say in a family, a parent has an autistic child. How might the parent know that their child might have PDA, and what might that look like?
sometimes the hallmark is that traditional approaches for autism or even anxiety don't help and can make
Okay.
things even harder. So
All
kind
right.
of behavioral way and routines and adult-led practices and firm boundaries and structures can make things harder, not easier.
Mm,
And also, a lot of these parents have thought their child was autistic, but taken the child for an assessment and was told the child couldn't be autistic because they make eye contact, they're very imaginative, they're very socially motivated, so autism gets ruled out.
hmm.
PDAs also kind of understand the expectations of the social world, so they can act like you're supposed to act during an assessment,
Okay.
and camouflage their difficulties.
Hmm.
Some PTAers hold it together at school and then fall apart at home. And sometimes schools don't even realize there was a problem until the child stops coming.
Right. Is this, I wonder if sometimes this is mistaken as defiance.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I think that happens more with Black and Brown children because, and
Mm,
hard to reach in the autism and PDA communities. And I think they're being labeled as having oppositional defiant disorder or contact
hmm.
conduct disorder. And it's being viewed as a behavior problem and not autism, which is another reason we really want people to know about PDA. But as you said, there's a lot to learn. But to me, the hardest part really is about unlearning what we've been taught about um, autism and what we've been taught about behavior and how to support people behaviorally.
Hmm.
Because generally, the world operates on thinking that rewards and consequences are the answer for kids who struggle with behavior, but that does not work and can make things harder for PDA kids.
Yeah, it
Whether
probably
it's
backfires, I would
right,
imagine. Yeah.
it increases anxiety, it builds pressure.
Yes.
Anything used to motivate kids builds pressure. And
Hmm.
that does not work for these individuals.
Well, we've talked a lot about how PDA, this is common, well, it's a subset in the autistic population. Do you see this in other groups of folks as well, or is it just the autistic folks?
Well, it's kind of this, in my mind, this non-stereotypical autistic population who may be diagnosed as autistic and who are may not.
Okay.
Most people are first diagnosed as ADHD,
All right.
sometimes highly sensitive people,
Mm-hmm.
but they're really just undiagnosed autistic. It's just because our view of autism is so narrow. And
Mm,
that's why I think like learning about PDA helps you better understand autism because you see it more broadly and
yeah.
not this like behavioral checklist that we've been
Right.
taught to use.
Yeah, so maybe just more of a neurodiverse umbrella, if we can just kind of look at it that way. Maybe that's where we would be more likely to see PDA and just not autism, but just kind of more in a broader group of people, a neurodiverse group of people. There
Even though
might be
I
more.
want people to understand that the majority of autistic people fit into this kind of broader, non-stereotypical autism.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so they can kind of see autism differently.
Yeah, this is part of the unlearning, right? That
Yep.
we look at autism from a broader perspective.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's so much more inclusive to girls and women that way and
Hmm.
other people who have
Yeah.
just getting along but having a really hard time and not having their support needs met and not
Hmm.
understanding themselves.
Earlier, when you were talking about your background, you had talked a little bit about trauma, and how does trauma figure into this whole equation of PDA?
I think two ways. I think autistic people are more likely to experience trauma. Well, three
Hmm.
ways. One. Second is that when you're when you kind of have a disability or you're not understood, you're just more likely to experience everyday traumas,
Hmm.
microaggressions, just of the misunderstanding,
Right.
and um, and just not being understood as a human and being put in situations that don't work for you or pushed to do things can
Hmm.
can cause trauma too. And
Yeah, it seems, when I do my assessments, I always ask about, in childhood experiences, about histories of bullying,
right,
and have you ever been bullied? And I probably, 95% of the clients say, "Yep, I was bullied as a kid because I was different," and all this kind of stuff.
right,
And
right,
that seems to me like that probably also figures into the anxiety, as we were talking about a little earlier as well.
right, right. And not feeling comfortable in school. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, how do people with PDA, how do they deal with this? How do they cope with this in in either helpful or unhelpful ways?
Well, what PDA individuals need is, besides understanding, is they need support from other humans so they can co-regulate. What helps a nervous system be okay is another nervous system. And we have
Okay.
this whole push towards independence and making people do things by themselves, and but they need that support and partnership and
Hmm.
other people. That's most important. I
Hmm.
think without that, PDAers can have um, problems with emotional regulation. Some people call it meltdowns, or in schools, they might call it challenging behavior. We like to
Hmm.
think of it as panic attacks because people get empathy and support in panic attacks. They
Yeah.
don't get, threats of punishment. So I
Hmm.
think that is a way people also cope by getting a lot of control, seeking control. Um,
Hmm.
too. There's a lot of depression when you're not understood and you're struggling and people don't understand what you need, or you might not even understand what you need.
Hmm.
Autistic people, including PDAers, have a hard time understanding their body and their own emotions.
Hmm.
Therapy sometimes is helpful, but not always for
Hmm.
PDAers and other autistic people. But
Hmm.
having supportive people in your life is so critical. They don't have to be therapists or traditional therapists, just
Have
people.
have you found, in your work with clients, that clients who had never heard of this term before, when they describe their experiences to you and you suggest that, have you ever heard of pathological demand avoidance? That putting a label or educating them, that seems to make a big difference for them when they finally kind of have this understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, because of my role as founder and executive director of PDA North America, most people come to me already are thinking PDA,
Yeah.
but For other people, yes. I mean, there's always a group of people who don't want to be labeled or don't want to be
Right.
uh, or even view themselves as autistic or PDA, but the majority of people find so much comfort in realizing they're not alone and that they've been misunderstood and kind of this isn't their fault. It just makes so much sense. There can be
Hmm.
so much relief for individuals and for parents.
Mm. Yeah. Well, to bring this to a close, could you share maybe one or two suggestions, recommendations for people who experience PDA? What would you recommend for them?
I think self-understanding is the most important, and finding partners kind of in that journey to support that self-understanding, because it's
Hmm.
big to do it yourself. And if you struggle with understanding yourself and talking about things and interoception, that reading your body signals, it's going to be hard to do alone. So
Yeah.
I think finding kind of a network, a village of people who you trust,
Hmm.
support yourself. And then I think the other thing is focusing on things that make one feel regulated, happy, joy, and go into a flow state, interested.
Sure.
And because sometimes I think a lot of us focus on the problems,
Hmm.
where finding passions and joys and connection, that makes life so much better.
You bet. Yeah, I agree with that totally. Well,
Absolutely.
Diane, if people are interested in learning more about you, what you do, your organization, where should they look?
Um, Either email info@pdanorthamerica.org or just PDA North America or DianeGouldTherapy.com. You can find me, but I can connect through any of those ways too.
And you had written a book, is that correct?
Yes. Yes, it just came out, Navigating PDA in America. I wrote with Ruth Fidler in the UK, who is a PDA expert and knows how to write books. And we also have a free webinar every month, PDA 101, the first Thursday night of the month. And it's on the PDA North America events page. And we have a big annual conference in March. And we're starting regional conferences, and we have free downloadable resources. So, and looking at the website's a good plan.
That's wonderful. I really appreciate you joining me today and
Fun.
educating our audience and me about
Yeah.
PDA. And this is wonderful, just for people just to kind of learn and to expand their understanding, not only of this, but just how this kind of fits into the autism puzzle as well.
Yes.
So I really appreciate your time.
Oh, my pleasure. I want people to know this. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, and you have a good rest of the day.
You too.
Okay.